What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper video. My name's Chad. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a trip through the last year. This is a 2022 recap. We're going to look at everything the burn archetype did throughout the year. Burn has recently come under fire on Twitter. See what I did there? With its performance and how it's stagnating the metagame and how you have to fight through so many of them in your leagues and challenges recently. So we are actually going to take a look back on the last year. We're going to take a look at the most played card of 2022, Lightning Bolt. And we're going to see if it's really as big a problem as everybody says it is. So in this video, we're going to take a little bit of a look through Pauper challenges of 2022 and look at the evolution of the burn deck and take a look at, well, its strengths, its weaknesses, and what seems to be its defining characteristics as we go through. So without further ado, welcome to the 2022 recap of the burn deck for Pauper. All right, we start off in January. January of 2022 was a year of lots of Pauper challenges and lots of high-performing Pauper decks. Among them, a top 16 finish by Tabadonk. I apologize, I'm going to slaughter many of these names, using what I call a classic burn or a combo Pauper burn. Now, this was an original Pauper variant. All right, now this operated off of the Thermo Alchemist creature, which is a creature that's a 0/3 for 2 with Defender. You can tap it to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you untap it. So this deck generated a lot of spell casts through things like Needle Drop, which lets you draw a new card and deal a damage at instant speed to something that had already been dealt damage, and continue cheaply channeling or chain gunning through spells. This operated off of a full 4 Fire Blasts, which was an iconic burn card for the majority of Pauper burn leading into the year. Operated off of Scare the Critics, Rift Bolts, Lava Spikes, and Chain Lightnings. Very, very classic core burn package, as well as running Searing Blaze, a historically very popular burn card, and Curse of the Pierced Heart. This deck had a lot of explosive potential. If it landed a turn 2 Alchemist, it could go very, very deep. Its ideal finish, typically speaking, with a full 7 of perfect card, 3 land drops, I believe, it could finish ideally on turn 3. The play pattern being you turn 1, suspend a Rift Bolt, or play a Chain Lightning, a Lava Spike, or a Lightning Bolt, take them down to 17. Turn 2, you hit a land drop, play your Thermal Alchemist. Turn 3, you go exactly tap to ping 1 damage down to 16, bolt them down to 13, untapping Alchemist, tap down to 12, play another Bolt or another 1 mana 3 damage spell, take them to 9, untap the Alchemist, tap down to 8, hit the last of your 3 damage spells for 1 mana, take them down to 5, untap the Alchemist, tap the Alchemist, put them at 4, sack 2 mountains for a Fire Blast, lethal on turn 3. So that was the optimal burn package and the best case scenario for it in January. Best finish I could find was a top 16. Next, we move into the February burn list. You can see very, very similar. In fact, almost exactly the same. The only changes being in the sideboard. So similar established shell. This was a top 4 finish by Back Off in February. Same shell, same idea. March, same thing. No changes. No changes to the main board, slight changes to the sideboard. That's all just going to be meta relevant. We're not focused on the sideboard so much right now. We're just going to look at the main deck configurations of these decks going forward. This was another top 4 finish by Back Off. The best performance I could find for the deck of the month. We go into April, same configuration. The only real note of changes is going to be in between Curse of the Pierced Heart and Scare the Critics. These lists seem to go back and forth on 3 of one, 4 of the other, and they interchange pretty regularly. Same deck configuration, same best case scenario. May, same deal. Best case scenario being a turn 3 kill. And then all of a sudden, something happens. Going into June, the old burn is out. The new red deck is Kiln Fiend. And this is a Kiln Fiend Blitz deck. It operates off of using Festival Crasher, Kiln Fiend, and in some lists, in this one specifically, this was a top 8 finish by Sandpop, Burning Prophet as well. Now this operates off of using Ancestral Anger, Crash Through, Mutagenic Growth, Lava Darts, Apostle's Blessings, lots of cheap, effective spells that buff your creatures using their triggered abilities, and then you would use Timber Battle Rage to force the damage through and finish them off. I believe turn 3 lethal is more than common in this deck if there's no interaction and everything is left to its own devices. You're very, very easily able to cast several spells on a turn and finish them off, specifically comboing it out with Manamorphose to trigger and generate mana neutral card value, as well as Lava Dart flashbacks with the sacrificing of a mountain, and Mutagenic Growth triggers by paying life. You're able to very, very quickly get in there on turn 3 for a lethal damage. July, very similar list. We're also looking at Kiln Fiend being the top iteration of Burn. This was a top 4 finish by Matthias Ponciano. Hard to get these names right. I apologize if it's incorrect. But this one, we actually have Monastery Swiftspear. Now, this was a threshold where Swiftspear was downshifted, and we very well may never see a burn deck without that card in Pauper again. That's a 1/2 haste prowess 4/1. It is an absolutely insane card. You'll see just here in Brothers War, a set that was printed later on this year. It was upshifted back from a common to an uncommon again. So the rarity for Double Masters 2022 allowed this card to be Pauper legal, and it was immediately shifted back up. So this deck, again, very, very powerful, totally capable of a turn 3 kill, and with the Monastery Swiftspear replacing the Burning Prophet from the previous iterations, we have a much more explosive early start as well as a secondary finisher. So great deck. It remains popular throughout the year, and in the next month you'll see very similar lists, still running Swiftspear, still running Kiln Fiend, still running Festival Crasher, with the suite of the same. We do see Reckless Impulse coming in and out of these lists. It's just a draw spell that allows you to go a little bit deeper, as opposed to things like Needle Drop, or in some cases of Kiln Fiend lists, they were running Faithless Looting. Similar idea, draws 2 cards. It just sets up a little bit of a longer game option should they have an answer to your turn 2 creature drop. Now, in September, everything changes again. We see decks have adopted very common solutions to the Kiln Fiend problem. Obviously, Apostle's Blessing is a very, very good card. However, in the face of very fast interactions such as Snuff Out, Cast Downs, and Chainer's Edicts are very, very popular against a deck with only 12 mainboard creatures that relies on one of those creatures actually getting to a combat step. So if you fight them off of their creatures, they have a really, really tough time winning. Now, we take a look at our September deck, and we have a winner of a Pauper Challenge by Top Grinder. The first win for this deck that I could find on the record for last year on MTGO. And they introduce a situation in which, well, we see that you bring in these Snuff Outs, we see that you bring in these Sacrifice Outlets, all of a sudden, that's not going to do the job anymore. We're not going to rely on one specific creature. We're going to rely on a host of cheap 1-drops. We're going to go really wide, and we're going to blitz you out. So again, this deck has those Swiftspears, but this deck operates off of a small value engine using Experimental Synthesizer and Kuldotha Rebirth. It also operates off of a small artifact sub-theme. We see Galvanic Blasts being included here, as well as Vidalcan Epicure to introduce blood tokens as additional sacrifice outlets for Kuldotha Rebirth, and Stars as a secondary sacrifice outlet as well. This deck is very, very fast. It's very, very consistent. It goes through a lot of cards thanks to Synthesizer and Reckless Impulse. It has enormous burst potential, thank you to this Bushwhacker here. And it is a singleton, but when it comes down, it makes an impact. So very, very fast deck. Seemed to capitalize on a lot of the people committing to removing Kiln Fiends to avoid dying and then playing kind of a slower game with better targeted removal and losing a lot of the sweepers that we had seen before. All of a sudden, you know, nobody was really running End the Festivities, or at least not very many of them. Same with Electrickeries had started to fall out because fairies were less and less popular after Swiftspear came down. So this deck came out, targeted the weaknesses of the decks that were targeting Kiln Fiend, and took over as the new top red deck. Now, you will see that that's pretty consistent here, because the next month in October, the same deck shows up. Slight variation in the configuration. This only has 1 Fire Blast instead of 2. But by and large, very, very similar list. Same goal. Wants to capitalize on those decks that are bringing in single target removal to deal with the Kiln Fiend decks. And it wants to capitalize on those. This deck, again, goes very, very wide, very, very quickly. It has a small value engine, so it had late game that a lot of the other burn decks had not had before it. Thanks to Reckless Impulse and the new synthesizer that was introduced with Neon Dynasty. November, similar story. Kuldotha Rebirth, still the top dog. We see Implements of Combustion coming in as an additional star. This is another artifact that they can sacrifice, but this one pings to damage, which isn't bad at all. For a red, it also goes into the graveyard and draws you a card, just like the star, so you have additional sacrifice fodder, and up the artifact count just slightly, so those Galvanic Blasts were on more often. We also see the introduction of a new card from Brothers War almost immediately, which is Goblin Blast Runner. This is a 1/2 Goblin, but it's a 3/2 with Menace as long as you've sacrificed a permanent. So using those stars, using those implements, using the synthesizers with Kuldotha Rebirth, you're able to get in with a really powerful goblin very quickly. Combine that with Swiftspear's pressure with haste, and you can go pretty fast. This deck applies a lot of pressure. You know, turn 1, Blast Runner, turn 2, Swiftspear, or like Star into a Rebirth, or Synthesizer into a Rebirth, and all of a sudden you're coming in very quickly for 3 damage. And this is just another lightning bolt that doesn't go to the graveyard when you cast it, right? So this gets in for 3 damage a lot and is very consistent as a threat, complementing this Monastery Swiftspear here. So same deck, continuing its reign. Going into December, no surprise here, we have the same deck, except this has introduced yet another card from Brothers War. Instead of the Blast Runner, though, we have Dwarven Forge Chanter. Now, this introduces another prowess threat next to the Monastery Swiftspear. This one's a little bit slower, no haste. It's a 1/3 for 2, but it has Ward, pay 2 life. So to remove this card, they are hurting themselves, which helps you further your cause. We do see the inclusion of a second Fire Blast, again, dropping that Goblin Bushwhacker that had been popular previously. This was another winner. This one was by Karate Dom. I apologize if I didn't name the winners of all the decks. They will be listed right up here. You can watch back if you're curious as to who was piloting each one. But this is the latest iteration that we saw coming into the close of the year. Now, this, you'd think, would be as good as this deck gets until we have something new come out. Well, as of the beginning of this year, we're starting to see a resurgence. Now that this go-wide red strategy has been around for several months, people are starting to adapt those targeted removal spells that this deck made so bad. We're starting to be swapped out. You're having things like Arms of Adar, Suffocating Fumes, you know, Crypt Rats from the mono black deck, Electrickery, all of these things coming back in to deal with all of those goblin tokens. And so this deck has a little bit less weakness to those, supplementing in this Forge Chanter and getting rid of the Goblin Bushwhacker, so it's not really as wide as the previous iterations the last couple of months, but we see some further iteration on that. And going into this month, we see kind of a return to the old burn staples. So we have another Pauper burn variant, this one by Maeda Asahi, coming out of Japan, which looks a lot like a return to the Thermo Alchemist deck, including things like the Flame Breather, the Firebrand Archer, which does a Thermo Alchemist impression, and you see this Forge Chanter Swiftspear combo really coming in clutch here. It's a return to the Searing Blaze variant, and a little bit more of that combo burn style with those Manamorphos coming back in. You again see the Chain Lightnings and the Lava Spikes coming back, where Galv Blast had really filled that role. Now the deck is adapting again to dodge the artifact removal and the board wipes in Suffocating Fumes and the like that have now become popular in order to deal with Kuldotha Red. So all of a sudden we have this cycle going back to the traditional burn now that is starting to capitalize on a couple of value creatures and chain gunning spells to remove the board weakness to those board wipes. And it really does make you wonder if ultimately this variant might rotate back towards Killing Fiend. And we see one more variant of this deck popping up in a recent challenge. This one is by Sheffy, or Sheffe. I do not know how to pronounce that name. I apologize. And this one still has the Monastery Swiftspear, but this one looks much, much more like the original Burn variant. If you look, we've got those Curse of the Pierced Hearts. We've even got Thermal Alchemists in the sideboard. So we're seeing sort of a resurgence of that very traditional Burn style coming back. And should the spot removal that had kept Killing Fiend down, that Kuldotha Red was so good at punishing, continue to kind of be lacking from a lot of these responsive decks trying to target burn, we may have to be prepared for another shift into Killing Fiend. So I think it's really interesting to look at the history of this deck's evolution, how it started in this traditional chain gun style burn deck, how it eventually capitalized in the lack of significant spot removal by going hard into this Killing Fiend and really forcing the meta to respond by including spot removal. And then once the meta had included spot removal, all of a sudden you take out those hard threats, you go really wide to punish the ones with clunky spot removal because your 1/1s don't care about their cast downs. And then once people start adapting to this 1/1 style of go wide red deck, bringing in all of those board wipes, we all of a sudden rotate right back off of those go wide creature strategies and go right back into this value oriented creature deck and this chain gun burn style of deck. So really interested to see what the next year brings for this red deck and the burn variants. Of course, the most played card of 2022, according to MTG Top Decks, being Lightning Bolt with an astounding 35% of all reported top 8 decks playing Lightning Bolt at an average of 3.8 bolts per deck. So an absolutely astounding year for red decks. You can see that there were top finishes for red in every month of the year. Does that mean action needs to be taken? Well, I think we'll leave that up to the PFP to decide, but personally, I don't think it does. I think that with correct foresight, targeting of these decks can be possible and is very, very accessible within the Pauper metagame. Things like Weather the Storm are very, very good against this chain gun style of burn. Things like Electrickery, Smash to Dust, Suffocating Fumes, Arms of Hadar, Pestilence, all of these are very, very strong against the go wide style of burn decks. We have Artifact Hate coming in against the more Sacrifice Kuldotha Rebirth style burn decks. Lone Missionary, Seeker of the Ways, all of these things can significantly impact the metagame for burn if they become popular. We also see with the Gates variant, Sacred Cat being an incredible card in that matchup. And the Gates package really backing up anything with lifelink makes red suffer. So if you're looking to target this deck, really look into playing maybe Caw Gates or the Mono Black Food Gates list that's been popping up on MTGO recently, as well as things like Combotron that gets to main deck Weather the Storm, things of that nature. Maybe Turbo Fog is also a pretty good matchup for this deck, just looking at 4 main board Weather the Storms being very, very relevant. So far from unbeatable as long as you know which version of the deck to expect, but keep an eye on the league results. Make sure you're up to date on what variant of burn you are likely to play, and you should be able to target it pretty successfully. So again, Burn had a fantastic year last year. Looking forward to see what Burn brings to the table in 2023. As usual, guys, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I hope you had a great 2022. Welcome to 2023, and good luck in your leagues, guys. As usual, drop some comments down below. Do you have a favorite Burn variant? Do you think that Burn needs to be dealt with by the PFP? Does something need to get banned? What are your thoughts? Let me know. Let's have a conversation. And as usual, guys, goodbye forever. Unless I see you next time. Peace out.